With the off-season hitting a bit of a dead period right now, the time for rankings, debates, and conversations about who's better than who and what's better than what is the only thing that the fans have to help keep them entertained until the new season starts up. New players are joining new teams, analysis about how the next season will go has already begun, and expectations for every player are already being set. With all of this, players tend to fall into relatively the same tiers amongst all of this discussion, but some find themselves either vastly overrated or underrated compared to what they actually bring to the table, and this brings us to the topic of today's video. Today, we'll be going through every team in the NBA, identifying the most underrated player in each squad. This will be a two-part video, with this one going through the Eastern Conference teams, and tomorrow's video going through the Western Conference teams. Before we start though, it turns out about 60% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I would also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. We'll be going in alphabetical order by city, so we'll start things off with the Atlanta Hawks, and the most underrated player here is Clint Capela. Trae Young justifiably gets a lot of the attention on the Hawks, and John Collins' high-flying ways got himself rewarded with a nice new contract this summer as well, but the X-factor throughout their conference finals run this past year was Capela, who sneakily played some unbelievable basketball. Most of his work comes defensively, which is exactly what the Hawks need, and he also led the league in rebounding this year. He's a perfect partner for Trae Young in the pick and roll, he protects the rim at a high level, and his impact cannot be understated. Next up is the Boston Celtics, and the most underrated player here is Robert Williams. Williams also signed a nice $54 million contract extension this summer, which surprised some people, but I can assure you that if you're unfamiliar with his game now, you won't be for much longer. Williams brings non-stop energy out on the floor on both ends, he's gotten significantly better in each of his first 3 seasons, he's ridiculously efficient, finishing around the basket, having shot over 70% from the field every year so far, and he has a natural knack for blocking shots. Next up is the Brooklyn Nets, and their most underrated player is Nicola Claxton. Claxton's stat line may not jump out to you as anything impressive on paper, but in just his second NBA season, he showed a ton of flashes of potential on both ends of the floor for a team ready to compete at the highest level. Offensively, he's a terrific athlete for a big man who attacks the basket hard and finishes well inside, but his value mostly comes defensively, where he's beginning to develop into one of the most versatile players at his position. He can guard several different positions, he's quick enough laterally to hold his own against smaller, quicker players, he protects the rim, and as long as he can stay healthier than he did last year, he's primed for a breakout season. Next up is the Charlotte Hornets, and their most underrated player is PJ Washington. Charlotte is quickly becoming the LaMelo Ball show, and then Terry Rozier and Gordon Hayward are the team's leading scorers, but PJ Washington is quietly developing into a perfect modern-day stretch 4. He puts up about 13 points per game, he plays solid defense, and he makes about 39% of his threes, so in the role that he's in, he makes the absolute most of it. Up next we have the Chicago Bulls, and their most underrated player is a new addition, being Lonzo Ball. Lonzo may have entered the league being a bit overrated, but it's now gotten to the point where the way he's viewed has hit the opposite end of the spectrum. He's worked incredibly hard on improving his shot off the ball as a spot-up shooter, his form has taken tremendous strides forward, he's now a great volume shooter from deep, and of course, the great court vision and passing ability that he came into the league with is still there to make the lives of those around him much easier. So I fully expect him to be a great complementary piece in Chicago around all of that new talent there. Next up we have the Cleveland Cavaliers, and their most underrated player is Darius Garland. The Cavaliers in general just didn't really get much attention last year, being a small market team at the bottom of the standings, but Garland is definitely worthy of more hype than he's getting. His second season last year saw him emerge in a big way across the board, and he's honestly just getting started. He put up about 17 points and 6 assists per game, he shot about 40% from 3, and his ability to score from all 3 levels efficiently, while also improving as a playmaker, is why the team is willing to go all in on him while shopping Colin Sexton. Next up is the Detroit Pistons, and their most underrated player is Saddiq Bey. Bey may not have the flashiest game, but he was one of the best rookies in the league last season. He's already a terrific perimeter defender, he's a knockdown spot-up shooter, he's a tweener at both forward positions so he can overpower smaller wing players while also being able to attack slower power forwards, and after struggling with his touch around the basket early in the season, he looked much more comfortable as the year progressed, which is great news as he heads into year 2. Up next is the Indiana Pacers, and their most underrated player is TJ Warren. Warren has landed on lists like these for years throughout his career, and after briefly emerging and breaking out in the bubble, he unfortunately suffered a season-ending injury early last season. Warren can confidently get buckets from all 3 levels, as he has a lethal mid-range game, he likes to take his matchup down to the post and overpower them, and his 3-point shooting has been over 40% each of the last 2 years before this injury-riddled one too. Up next is the Miami Heat, and their most underrated player is Bam Adebayo. Even after emerging as an all-star 2 seasons ago, Bam somehow still remained underrated this year, as he improved drastically across the board, and yet failed to be named an all-star over guys like Domantas Sabonis and Nikola Vucevic, who I firmly believe he is better than. He's also one of the best defenders in the whole NBA, and only got named second team all-defense instead of where I believe he should have been named first, so this upcoming season will be a big year for him to assert himself with a rejuvenated Heat squad looking to make another deep playoff run. Up next is the Milwaukee Bucks, and their most underrated player is Donte DiVincenzo. DiVincenzo unfortunately suffered an injury early in the playoffs against the Heat, so he could only watch as his team won the championship. But he did start every game in the regular season that he played in for them, and his work as a glue guy in the lineup, spacing the floor with his shooting, cutting off the ball, crashing the glass well for a guard, and playing tough defense is still very important for the team going into next year, after they lost a few of the key pieces in that championship run to free agency. Next up is the New York Knicks, and their most underrated player is Mitchell Robinson. Robinson is one of the best young defensive anchors in the league right now, but injuries, again, held him back from consistently showing it last year after a promising first 2 seasons. He's a good rim runner, finisher around the basket, doesn't try to do too much, and knows his strengths and sticks to them, so the Knicks defense should be getting even better next year with him back at full strength protecting the rim. Next up is the Orlando Magic, and their most underrated player is Jonathan Isaac. I know it's been the case with quite a few players we've discussed today, but Isaac as well was held back by injuries last season and will be looking to emerge in a big way upon return. When he was last healthy, he was demonstrating potential to be possibly a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, and his versatility as a defender inside and out should be able to shine through even more now that the Magic are fully focusing on developing their young talent like him. Next up is the Philadelphia 76ers, and their most underrated player is Seth Curry. Always being in the shadow of his brother, Seth has been underrated for a while now, but he too is a gamer who can bring it on the big stage with this sharp shooting that he possesses. With how disappointing the Sixers season ended, it's easy to forget, but Seth was arguably their second best player in the Hawks series, stepping up game after game, scoring timely points in bunches. He's one of the most efficient shooters in the history of the NBA from 3, but the simple fact is that he's Steph Curry's brother, and that's always been why he doesn't get the proper respect that he deserves for it. Next up is the Toronto Raptors, and their most underrated player is OG Anunoby. Anunoby has one of the most balanced skill sets for a young player in the league right now, but again, he's not very flashy about it, so he doesn't exactly dominate headlines. He's a strong wing player that scores 16 points per game while making 48% of his shots and 40% of his threes. He likes to post up smaller defenders, his ability to create for himself gets better and better every year, and defensively, he's so impactful and versatile across the board. And finally, the last team up is the Washington Wizards, and their most underrated player is Rui Hachimura. Hachimura was a reliable third option on the Wizards last year, while the public generally viewed the Wizards as a two-player team. He elevated his play in the playoffs, his shot creation is underrated, and when given the opportunity, he's shown that he can handle more of an offensive workload, which we should be able to see this season with Russell Westbrook gone, so he will get more of an opportunity. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below who you think is underrated on these teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.